She thought her decades in Congress made her untouchable. The country lawyer from Louisiana brought receipts. The Senate Banking Committee hearing room buzzed with anticipation. Cameras lined the back wall. Their red recording lights cast an ominous glow. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi walked to the witness table with the confidence of someone who'd navigated Washington's treacherous waters for 37 years. She wore a tailored suit in signature purple, her posture erect despite her 84 years. Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana sat quietly at the committee table, organizing a stack of manila folders with methodical precision. His reading glasses perched on his nose, his white hair slightly disheveled in that approachable way that made folks back home trust him. When he looked up, his expression carried the mild curiosity of a man who'd just noticed something mildly interesting in the newspaper. The hearing topic seemed innocuous enough: ethics and transparency in congressional financial dealings. But anyone who'd watched Kennedy operate knew that his folksy demeanor concealed the mind of an Oxford-educated lawyer who'd spent 17 years managing Louisiana's finances as state treasurer. "Madam Speaker, Congresswoman Pelosi," Kennedy began, his Louisiana drawl stretching syllables like taffy. "I do appreciate you joining us today. I know you're a busy woman." Pelosi smiled graciously. "Thank you, Senator. I'm always happy to discuss transparency in government." "Well, now, that's good to hear, ma'am. Real good." Kennedy adjusted his glasses and pulled out the first document. "See, I've been looking at some numbers, and I'm what you might call confused. Now, I'm just a country lawyer from Louisiana, so maybe you can help me understand something." He displayed a chart on the overhead screen. 2 columns of numbers appeared, clearly labeled. According to public records, when you first entered Congress in 1987, your net worth was approximately $2.7 million. That's a right healthy sum. Don't get me wrong, nothing to sneeze at. Pelosi nodded. "My husband Paul has always been a successful businessman." "Yes, ma'am, I'm sure he has been." Kennedy's tone remained pleasant, almost conversational. "Now, here's where I get a little turned around in my thinking. Your most recent financial disclosures show a net worth of, well, estimates vary, but most put it somewhere between $250 million and $400 million. The number hung in the air like humidity on a Louisiana afternoon. Kennedy let the silence stretch for a moment, then continued in that same unhurried drawl. "So that's an increase of," and I had my staff check my arithmetic, because math was never my strong suit, "approximately 2,292% over 37 years. He looked up from his papers with an expression of genuine bewilderment. "Ma'am, I'm wondering if you could help educate this committee on how a person might accomplish that while earning a government salary. Because I've been in public service for a good while now, and I'll be honest with you, I haven't figured out that particular trick." Several committee members chuckled. Pelosi's smile tightened slightly. "Senator, as I've stated many times, my husband manages our family's investments through his firm, Financial Leasing Services. I don't personally own any stocks. We comply fully with all disclosure requirements under the law." "Oh, I'm sure you do, ma'am. I'm sure you do." Kennedy nodded slowly, the way you might acknowledge someone explaining why the sky is green. "The law says you have to disclose, and you disclose. That's following the letter of the law, no question about it." He pulled out another folder, this one thicker than the first. "But see, what interests me isn't whether you followed disclosure rules. What interests me is the substance of those disclosures, the actual trades your husband made, their timing relative to your legislative activities, that sort of thing." Kennedy opened the folder and pulled out a document with the Nvidia corporate logo visible at the top. "Let's start with a company called Nvidia. You familiar with them, Congresswoman?" Pelosi shifted slightly. They're a technology company, semiconductors, I believe. Yes, ma'am, that's right. Semiconductors. Kennedy pronounced each syllable carefully, as if savoring an unfamiliar word. Now, let me ask you about July of 2022. Do you remember what Congress was voting on that month? Senator, that was over 2 years ago. The CHIPS and Science Act, Kennedy supplied helpfully. $52 billion in subsidies to the semiconductor industry, companies like Nvidia, Intel, AMD. You were Speaker of the House at the time. You publicly championed that bill, called it essential for American competitiveness. That's correct. It was important legislation. Important indeed, Kennedy nodded. Now here's the interesting part, and this is where I need your help understanding the coincidence. That same month, your husband exercised call options to purchase 25,000 shares of Nvidia stock, value of over $1 million. The room went quiet, except for the sound of reporters typing. Kennedy looked at Pelosi over his reading glasses. Now, Congresswoman, I'm sure that was just a coincidence. Your husband, who you live with, who you share meals with, who's been married to you for over 60 years, he just happened to make $1 million bet on semiconductors right before you voted to give them $52 billion in taxpayer money. He paused, then added with perfect deadpan delivery, "That's what we call good timing back in Louisiana." Nervous laughter rippled through the gallery. Pelosi's jaw tightened. "Senator, my husband makes his own investment decisions. I have no involvement." "Oh, I believe you, ma'am. I surely do." Kennedy's expression remained guileless. "But here's what I find real interesting about this particular trade." He pulled out another document, this one showing a stock chart. After the public caught wind of your husband's perfectly timed purchase, there was quite a bit of fuss about it. Ethics questions, media attention, that sort of thing. So what did your husband do? Kennedy looked up, eyebrows raised in innocent inquiry. He sold all 25,000 shares, took a loss of $341,365. That's a substantial loss by most folks' standards. He pulled up the current Nvidia stock price. Now, here's the real head-scratcher. If your husband had held on to those shares, if he'd just weathered the criticism, they'd be worth about $12.2 million today. He missed out on $8.2 million in profit. Kennedy let that sink in, then delivered his assessment with the timing of a championship debater who'd learned his craft at Princeton and Oxford. So let me see if I understand this correctly, ma'am. Your husband had access to information about legislation affecting semiconductors. He made a perfectly timed trade, got caught, panic sold at a $300,000 loss, and missed out on $8 million. He looked directly at Pelosi, his expression utterly sincere. Congresswoman, that's not insider trading. That's just bad insider trading. The gallery erupted. Committee members struggled to maintain composure. Even some Democratic staffers covered their mouths to hide smiles. Pelosi's face flushed crimson. Kennedy allowed himself a small smile, then continued as if he'd said nothing remarkable. But that's not even the most interesting part of the Nvidia story. Would you like to hear the rest? Before Pelosi could respond, Kennedy pulled out another disclosure form, this one dated December 2023. Because your husband got back into Nvidia. November 2023, purchased 50 call options, strike price of $120, transaction value between $1 million and $5 million. He looked up. Made over $1 million in 73 days. That's 4.75 times your congressional salary, earned in less than 3 months on one trade. Kennedy paused, then added thoughtfully, "Now, When did you disclose this particular trade to the public? He held up the form. December 22nd, 2023. That's the Friday right before Christmas weekend, when everybody's traveling to see family and newsrooms are running skeleton crews. His tone remained pleasant, almost chatty. Now, I'm just a simple man from Louisiana, but where I come from, we call that timing. Some folks might call it something else. They might call it, what's the word I'm looking for? He appeared to search for the right term, then snapped his fingers. Deceptive. That's the word. Deceptive. The room had gone completely silent. Every camera focused on Pelosi's face. Kennedy closed that folder and opened another, this one labeled Visa. But we're just getting started, Congresswoman. We haven't even talked about Visa yet. Kennedy pulled the visa documents toward him with the unhurried deliberation of a man who had all afternoon and nothing better to do than ask uncomfortable questions. He glanced at the papers, then back at Pelosi, his expression carrying that same mild, almost apologetic curiosity. Congresswoman, let's talk about another one of your husband's trades. This one's more recent, so maybe the details will be fresher in your memory. He displayed a transaction report on the screen. July 2024. Your husband sold 2,000 shares of Visa Incorporated. The disclosure lists the value as between $500,000 and $1 million. Based on the date and the stock price, looks like about $526,000. Kennedy looked up. Now, can you tell this committee why your husband decided to sell his Visa stock in July? Senator, as I've explained, I don't involve myself in my husband's investment decisions. Right. You've said that. Kennedy waved a hand as if brushing away a bothersome fly. But here's what I find curious about the timing. He pulled up a news headline dated September 24th, 2024. 2 months after the sale. 2 months after your husband sold his Visa stock, the Department of Justice filed a civil antitrust lawsuit against Visa, accused them of illegally monopolizing the debit card market. The stock dropped 5% that day. Kennedy removed his glasses and looked directly at Pelosi. So your husband sold $500,000 worth of Visa stock 2 months before the DOJ filed a major lawsuit against the company. Another remarkable piece of timing. He put his glasses back on and shuffled through more papers. But maybe that's just 2 coincidences. Let me tell you what I did. I had my staff go through all your financial disclosures over the past 5 years, every stock trade your husband made. And you know what we found? Kennedy pulled out a comprehensive timeline and displayed it on the screen. 20-plus trades, each marked with dates and corresponding legislative or regulatory events. June 2021. Your husband exercised Alphabet, call options for over $5 million. 1 week later, the House Judiciary Committee advanced antitrust legislation targeting big tech companies. Your husband made $5.3 million on that trade. He moved to the next entry. Microsoft options exercised right before a major federal contract announcement. Tesla sold before production issues became public. Apple purchases ahead of regulatory changes favorable to the company. Kennedy looked up from the timeline. Now, Congresswoman, I took statistics at Vanderbilt University, got an A, if memory serves, though that was a long time ago. And I can tell you that the odds of getting all these trades right, timing the market this perfectly, this consistently, just by luck, he shook his head slowly. Well, ma'am, you'd have better odds of winning the lottery twice in the same week while being struck by lightning. Several committee members couldn't suppress their laughter. Pelosi gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Senator Kennedy, these accusations are baseless. Accusations? Kennedy's eyebrows rose in genuine-seeming surprise. Ma'am, I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm just reading from your own financial disclosure forms. These are your numbers, your trades, your timing. He pulled out another document, this one a video transcript. But let's talk about what you said when folks started asking questions about congressional stock trading. This is from a December 2021 press conference. A reporter asked you whether members of Congress should be banned from trading individual stocks. Kennedy read slowly, emphasizing each word. We are a free market economy. They should be able to participate in that. He looked up, his expression thoughtful. A free market economy. Now, Congresswoman, with all due respect, and I mean that sincerely, when you know which bills are coming up for a vote, when you participate in classified briefings about national security and economic policy, when you vote on regulations that directly affect specific companies, Kennedy paused, letting the implications settle. Ma'am, that's not a free market. That's a rigged market. The words landed like a hammer despite his gentle delivery. In fact, Kennedy continued, reaching for yet another document, your trading was so concerning that Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri introduced legislation specifically to address it. Bill number S3339. Want to know what it's called? He held up the bill, angling it so the cameras could see the title. Kennedy spelled it out slowly, savoring each letter. PELOSI stands for Preventing Elected Leaders from Owning Securities and Investments. They named a bill to ban congressional stock trading after you, Congresswoman. Now, I've been in Congress a while, and I've had some bills passed, but I've never had one named after me. He shook his head in mock admiration. That's quite an honor. The deadpan delivery was perfection. Even some Democrats in the gallery had to look away to hide their smiles. Pelosi tried to respond. That bill was a political stunt. A stunt? Kennedy's tone remained mild. Maybe so, ma'am, but you know what's not a stunt? This. He displayed a stock ticker on the screen. NANS, the Unusual Whales Subversive Democratic Trading ETF. You know what they call it for short? And as in Nancy. It's an exchange-traded fund that tracks your stock trades. People actually pay money to copy your investments because your returns consistently beat the market. Kennedy leaned back in his chair, his expression one of genuine wonderment. Now, Warren Buffett is arguably the greatest investor in American history. The man's been studying markets for 70 years, started reading financial statements when most boys were reading comic books. And your husband, a venture capitalist with no particular expertise in semiconductor technology, or antitrust law, or federal contracting procedures, somehow beats Warren Buffett's returns. He looked at Pelosi with that innocent, questioning expression. Ma'am, how do you explain that? Pelosi opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. My husband has been very successful in his business ventures. Yes, ma'am, he certainly has been. Kennedy's tone carried a hint of something that might have been sympathy. But that's not really an answer to my question, is it? He organized his papers, taking his time. See, here's what troubles me. You've served in Congress for 37 years. You've represented the great city of San Francisco all that time, and I think it might be instructive to look at how that city has fared while you've been getting wealthier. Kennedy pulled out a new folder, this one containing photographs. Let's talk about San Francisco, shall we? His expression shifted slightly, his folksy manner taking on a more somber edge. He pulled out a series of photographs and began displaying them on the overhead screen. The first image showed a San Francisco street corner. Tents lined the sidewalk, extending as far as the camera could see. People lay on cardboard surrounded by trash and makeshift shelters. Congresswoman, you've represented San Francisco since 1987. That's 37 years. How would you say the city is doing? Before Pelosi could answer, Kennedy displayed another photo. What appeared to be an open-air drug market, people openly using needles in broad daylight. According to the San Francisco Chronicle, homelessness in your district has increased by 300% during your tenure. Drug overdose deaths reached an all-time high last year. Businesses are leaving in record numbers. Store windows boarded up. Crime statistics that would make folks in most American cities weep. He looked at the photos with what appeared to be genuine sadness. But here's what I find peculiar. While San Francisco has been, shall we say, experiencing some difficulties, your personal net worth has gone from 2.7 million to over 250 million. Kennedy turned from the images to look directly at Pelosi. It seems like one of those things is going in the wrong direction, wouldn't you say? Pelosi started to respond about the complexity of urban challenges, but Kennedy was already moving to his next point. Now, let's talk about where you live when you're in San Francisco. Your primary residence is in the Pacific Heights neighborhood. Beautiful area, one of the most exclusive in the city. He pulled out property records. Your home is valued at somewhere between $25 and $30 million. Red brick mansion. Panoramic views of San Francisco Bay. The neighborhood where the average home costs $8 million. Where security is tight. Where, funny thing, you don't see many homeless encampments. Kennedy stacked several more property documents. Then there's your Napa Valley Vineyard, estimated value $6 to $8 million, includes actual vineyards, a guest house, beautiful rolling hills. Nice place to escape the city when things get a bit too real. Another document, Georgetown House in Washington, D.C. $3 million close to Capitol Hill, very convenient. He added more papers to the pile. Commercial properties in San Francisco, ownership stake in a high-end Italian restaurant, various other real estate holdings, all told about $40 million in real estate alone. Kennedy let the numbers settle, then posed his question in that same mild conversational tone. Congresswoman, you give speeches about fighting for working families, about the affordable housing crisis, about income inequality. These are fine speeches, very moving, but I'm curious. Which working families live in $30 million mansions? He didn't wait for an answer. The average rent in San Francisco is $3,500 a month. Your property taxes on your Pacific Heights home alone could house a dozen families for a year. The working people you claim to represent can't afford to live in the city you represent. But you're doing just fine. Kennedy pulled out his phone, queued up a video. In fact, during the COVID pandemic, while small businesses in your district were being forced to close, while working families were struggling to pay rent, you posted a video tour of your kitchen, showed off your fancy ice cream collection, $12 per pint, kept in a $24,000 freezer. He played a clip. There was Pelosi cheerfully displaying her gourmet ice cream while millions of Americans were out of work. And then, while salons were closed under lockdown orders you supported, you went to your salon to get your hair done. When you got caught on security cameras, do you remember what you said? Kennedy looked at her, eyebrows raised. You said you were set up. Your hairdresser set you up by doing your hair, while every other salon in San Francisco was closed by your lockdown orders. He shook his head slowly. Ma'am, that's not being set up. That's called rules for thee, but not for me. The gallery was completely silent now, every eye focused on the exchange. But you know what really gets me? Kennedy's voice took on a harder edge, though he never raised it. It's the disconnect. You preach about economic justice while living like royalty. You lecture about climate change while owning multiple mansions. You talk about transparency while disclosing stock trades on Friday afternoons before holiday weekends. He organized his papers with deliberate care.
And when people started asking questions, when regular folks noticed that something didn't smell quite right, you know what you said? We're a free market economy. As if the market were free when the people making the rules are also making millions trading on those same rules. Kennedy pulled out more disclosure forms. Let me give you some more numbers, because numbers don't lie. In 2023 alone, your husband's trades included Broadcom purchases worth up to $5 million, Nvidia purchases worth up to $1.2 million, Tesla sales worth up to $500,000, Visa sales worth up to $500,000. All perfectly legal under current law, all perfectly timed to legislative and regulatory events. He looked up. You know what the return on your portfolio was last year? 54%. The S&P 500 returned about 26%. Your portfolio returned more than double the market average. Not just beat it, doubled it. Kennedy's voice carried a note of wonder. Hedge fund managers with teams of analysts, artificial intelligence, inside corporate access, they wish they could achieve those returns. But somehow your husband does it, year after year. He stood up for the first time in the hearing, his full height commanding the room's attention. This was a signal everyone recognized. Kennedy was building to something. Congresswoman Pelosi, I'm going to be real straight with you now. I'm going to drop the folksy routine for just a minute. His Louisiana drawl remained, but the tone shifted to pure prosecutorial precision. You have made a fortune while in public office, not through your salary, not through shrewd, long-term investments in index funds, but through perfectly timed trades in individual companies whose fate you directly influence through your legislative votes and insider knowledge. Kennedy counted on his fingers, a gesture he was famous for. Point 1. You and your husband made over $250 million while you voted on legislation affecting those very companies. Nvidia before the CHIPS Act, Visa before the DOJ lawsuit, Google before antitrust actions. The timing is too perfect, too consistent, too profitable to be mere luck. Point 2. When asked about banning this practice, you defended it as free market capitalism. But ma'am, when you know what's coming before the market knows, when you vote on the very regulations that affect stock prices, that's not a free market. That's insider knowledge. Point 3. You disclose these trades on Friday afternoons before holiday weekends, using every legal trick to minimize media coverage. That's not transparency. That's covering your tracks. Point 4. The city you've represented for 37 years is falling apart. Homelessness, drugs, crime, businesses fleeing, but you've never been richer. Your constituents can't afford rent, but you're buying vineyards. Point 5. When confronted with these facts, you hide behind your husband. I don't own any stocks, you say, as if the American people are stupid enough to believe you don't talk to your husband of 60 years about his million-dollar trades in companies you regulate. He placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. Ma'am, I can't prove you broke any laws. The laws were written by people like you to protect people like you. But I can prove something else. I can prove you've made a mockery of public service. You've enriched yourself while cities crumble. You've defended a system that lets elected officials trade on insider knowledge while calling it capitalism. And you've done it all while preaching about helping working families. Kennedy's voice dropped to a near whisper, but in the silent room, every word carried. Back home in Louisiana, we have a saying, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. You've shown us who you are, Congresswoman, an elected official who got very, very rich, while the people you represent got very, very poor. He straightened up, his expression conveying something between disappointment and disgust.
Now, I can't prove you broke any laws because, like I said, you helped write those laws. But I'll tell you what I can prove. You've turned public service into a profit center. You've used your position to enrich yourself, and when people noticed, you had the gall to call it free market capitalism. Kennedy picked up his papers, tapping them into a neat stack. Ma'am, where I come from, we call that shameful. The word hung in the air like a verdict. Pelosi tried to respond, her voice shaking slightly. Senator Kennedy, I resent these insinuations. Insinuations? Kennedy's eyebrows rose. Ma'am, these aren't insinuations. These are your own financial disclosure forms, your own words on video, your own voting record. I'm not insinuating anything. I'm reading what you filed with the federal government. He sat back down, his voice returning to that mild conversational tone. But you know what? I'm going to give you a chance to explain, right here, right now, under oath, in front of the American people. How did you make $250 million on a government salary? How did your husband consistently time his trades perfectly with legislative events? How do you justify living in a $30 million mansion while the people you represent sleep in tents? Kennedy folded his hands and waited, his expression one of patient expectation. The silence stretched. Pelosi opened her mouth several times, but seemed unable to form a coherent response. Her prepared talking points about compliance and free markets sounded hollow even to her own ears after Kennedy's systematic dismantling. Finally, she managed, My husband has built a successful business over many years. Yes, ma'am. You've said that. Kennedy's tone was almost gentle now, like a teacher dealing with a student who hasn't done the reading. But that's not an answer. That's a dodge. And the American people deserve better than dodges. He glanced at the committee chairman. Mr. Chairman, I believe I've made my point. I have no further questions for this witness. As Kennedy gathered his papers, the gallery erupted. Democrats scrambled to distance themselves from what they'd just witnessed. Republicans took copious notes for future campaign ads. Media members frantically updated their headlines. And Nancy Pelosi sat at the witness table. Her decades of Washington armor finally penetrated by the simple weapon of documented facts and folksy questions. The country lawyer from Louisiana had just delivered a master class in how to destroy a political opponent without ever raising your voice. The hearing room slowly regained order, but the damage was done. As other senators asked follow-up questions, Pelosi's answers grew more defensive, more evasive. She repeatedly fell back on, I don't own any stocks, and my husband makes his own decisions, statements that rang increasingly hollow after Kennedy's methodical presentation. By the time the chairman gavelled the hearing to a close 2 hours later, Pelosi looked diminished. The confident speaker who'd walked into the room had been replaced by a defensive octogenarian whose carefully constructed wall of deniability lay in ruins. As she left the hearing room, reporters shouted questions. She ignored them all. Her security detail hustled her toward the waiting car. The hashtag Pelosi stock scandal trended #1 on Twitter. Cable news played Kennedy's bad insider trading line on a continuous loop. Late-night comedy shows had already cut clips for their monologues. In San Francisco, Pelosi's district office phones rang off the hook. Angry constituents demanded answers. A progressive challenger announced a primary campaign promising to refuse all stock trades if elected. Even Democrats began quietly distancing themselves. We've long supported reasonable restrictions on congressional trading, one leadership aide told reporters, carefully avoiding any mention of Pelosi by name. The Pelosi Act, which had languished in committee for 2 years, suddenly gained bipartisan co-sponsors. Republican leadership scheduled hearings. Even senators who'd been reluctant to support it found themselves unable to defend the status quo after Kennedy's presentation. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who had previously been careful about criticizing party elders, tweeted, "Congressional stock trading undermines public trust. Period. It's time for a complete ban." The Nancy ETF, which had been marketed partly as a joke and partly as a serious investment strategy, saw its largest one-day outflow ever as investors worried about reputational damage. Senator John Kennedy sat on the back porch of his modest home in Madisonville, Louisiana, the house worth perhaps $300,000, a rounding error in Pelosi's portfolio, overlooking a peaceful bayou. Kennedy sipped sweet tea and watched the sun set over the water. A local news crew from WDSU New Orleans arrived for an interview. They set up their camera on the porch while Kennedy's wife brought out more sweet tea for everyone. "Senator Kennedy," the young reporter began, "your questioning of Nancy Pelosi has gone viral. Millions of views across social media. How does it feel?" Kennedy considered the question, his expression thoughtful. "Well now, I wasn't trying to go viral. I was trying to ask some questions that I suspect a lot of regular folks have been wondering about. How does someone make $250 million while working in government? How does that happen?" Speaker Pelosi's office released a statement calling your questions a partisan attack designed to distract from real issues. Kennedy chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, she's entitled to her opinion, but I'll tell you what. Those weren't partisan questions. Those were arithmetic questions. 2.7 million in 1987, 250 million today. That's just math. Math isn't partisan." "Do you think she broke the law?" "I'm not a prosecutor, and I'm not the one to make that determination. What I can say is that there's a big difference between what's legal and what's right. They might have made all those trades legally. The laws were written to allow it, but that doesn't make it right." The reporter pressed, "What would you like to see happen?" Kennedy sat down his tea glass and looked directly at the camera. "I'd like to see Congress pass a law banning members and their immediate family members from trading individual stocks. Let them put their money in index funds, mutual funds, blind trusts. I don't care. But they shouldn't be able to trade individual stocks when they know what legislation is coming. That's just common sense." He paused, then added, "And you know what? I think most Americans agree. Democrat, Republican, Independent, doesn't matter. Regular folks understand that it's wrong for the people making the rules to profit from those rules. That's not partisan. That's just basic fairness." "Senator, your folksy style has become famous. Some critics say it's an act." Kennedy's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Well, I reckon I am from Louisiana. I did grow up here. This is how we talk. If that makes me folksy, so be it. But I'll tell you what's not an act. Asking simple questions and expecting honest answers. That's not folksy. That's just doing your job." A neighbor walking a dog waved from the street. Kennedy waved back, called out, "Hey there, Bobby. How's your mama doing?" The reporter noticed the interaction. "You still live in your hometown?" "Yes, ma'am, I do. Never saw a reason to leave. I fly to Washington when I need to, but this is home. These are my people. And I figure if I'm going to represent Louisiana, I ought to live in Louisiana." He gestured toward the bayou. "My mortgage is about $1,200 a month. I can afford that on a senator's salary. Now, I couldn't afford a $30 million mansion in San Francisco, but, then again, I'm not trying to. This suits me just fine." The contrast with Pelosi's Pacific Heights estate went unspoken, but was obvious to everyone watching. "What message do you hope people take from today's hearing?" Kennedy thought for a moment, then spoke with uncommon seriousness. "I hope people remember that we work for them, not the other way around. We are public servants." That word, servant, it means something. It means you put the public interest ahead of your private gain. It means you don't use your position to enrich yourself. He picked up his tea glass again, swirled the ice. "My daddy worked in a factory, never made more than $40,000 a year in his life. But he was honest. He paid his taxes. He didn't cut corners. And when he passed, he didn't leave us millions of dollars. But he left us something more valuable. A good name. His word meant something." Kennedy's voice carried conviction without volume. "I'd rather be poor and honest than rich and shameful. And I think most Americans feel the same way." They're not asking for their representatives to be perfect, but they're asking them to be honest, to play by the same rules everybody else plays by, to serve the public instead of serving themselves. He set down the glass with finality. And when someone in power breaks that trust, when they use their position to make millions while the people they represent struggle to make ends meet, well, somebody's got to ask some questions. Today, I asked some questions, and I think the answers, or the lack of answers, told folks everything they need to know. The interview wrapped up. As the crew packed their equipment, Kennedy helped carry cables to their van, chatted with them about LSU football, asked about their families, wished them safe travels back to New Orleans. After they left, Kennedy returned to his porch. His wife joined him, sitting in the chair next to his. "You were pretty tough on her," she observed. Kennedy nodded slowly. "I was, but somebody needed to be. These folks in Washington, they've been playing by their own rules for too long. They've forgotten who they work for. Do you think anything will change?" "Maybe, maybe not. But at least people are talking about it now. At least they're asking questions. That's a start." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade over the bayou. Somewhere in San Francisco, Nancy Pelosi sat in her $30 million mansion, her carefully constructed image in tatters. Somewhere in Washington, staffers scrambled to contain the damage, to spin the narrative, to protect their boss. But here in Louisiana, a country lawyer who'd never forgotten where he came from sat on his modest porch, content that he'd done his job. He'd asked simple questions. He'd told the truth. He'd stood up for the people who couldn't afford million-dollar stock trades or Pacific Heights mansions. In the gathering darkness, fireflies began their nightly dance over the water. Kennedy watched them, a small smile on his face. "You know what my mama used to say?" he told his wife. She said, "The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Just let it loose. It'll defend itself. I just let the truth loose today. That's all. The rest will take care of itself." They went inside, leaving the porch swing moving gently in the evening breeze. In Washington, the political establishment would spend weeks trying to recover from what had just happened. But in Louisiana, life went on as it always had. Simple, honest, and true. The country lawyer had taught his lesson. Whether Washington learned it remained to be seen. But the American people had heard it loud and clear. Epilogue: The Pelosi Act passed the Senate Banking Committee by a bipartisan vote of 18-6. House leadership, reading the political winds, announced they would bring it to the floor for a vote. Polls showed 84% of Americans supported banning congressional stock trading. Nancy Pelosi announced she would not seek re-election in 2026. Her statement cited a desire to spend more time with family and made no mention of Kennedy or the hearing. The Nancy ETF was renamed and restructured, dropping all reference to Pelosi. Senator John Kennedy, when asked for comment on Pelosi's retirement announcement, simply said, I wish the Congresswoman well. Public service is difficult, and she served for many years. I hope she enjoys her retirement." Then he added, with that familiar twinkle in his eye, "She can certainly afford to." And somewhere in Louisiana, on a modest porch overlooking a peaceful bayou, a country lawyer sipped his sweet tea and smiled. The truth had indeed defended itself.